Atalaia do Norte, Brazil, there's nowhere to hide on the water. Looking out from stilt houses high atop the bluffs, the river dwellers have a clear view of everything that putters down the Itaquai. Nothing goes by unnoticed, not even the small aluminum motorboat that rounded the bend here early one Sunday in June. One was Bruno Pereira, an activist investigating poachers in the nearby indigenous territory. The other was Dom Phillips, a British journalist documenting his work. The men had left their Amazon rainforest encampment at dawn, early enough, they believed, to sneak past the river community where some of the poachers lived and make it back to town. But a poacher known as Pelado was already awake. The wiry and hardened fisherman was standing outside his wood plank house above the water filling a canister with gasoline, according to a confession he gave to police, when he spotted the boat. But he recognized the bearish man piloting the vessel. It was his nemesis, the man had allegedly told others he wanted to shoot. Bruno Pelado put down the canister. There he goes, he called to another fisherman, he later told police. Pelado and the other man headed down to the river, each carrying a 16-gauge shotgun. They climbed into Pelado's boat and took off after the two men, vanishing around the river bend and setting in motion a series of events that would shock the country, draw worldwide attention to the criminal dismantling of the Amazon, and grow grimmer by the day. First, the disappearances of Dom and Bruno, then the frantic searches, then days of taut uncertainty, and finally the arrests, confessions and morbid revelations. Dom and Bruno had been shot dead, burned, dismembered and buried deep in the forest. Yellow police tape seen on August 17 indicates the approximate point on the Itaquai River where Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira were killed. Indigenous people sing a sacred prayer at Bruno's funeral at the Morada da Paz Cemetery in Paulista, in Brazil's Pernambuco state, on June 24. He was there to report on the Awa, considered one of the world's most endangered tribes. Bonnie Jo Mount, The Washington Post. Top. Yellow police tape seen on August 17 indicates the approximate point on the Itaquai River where Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira were killed. Left. Indigenous people sing a sacred prayer at Bruno's funeral at the Morada da Paz Cemetery in Paulista, in Brazil's Pernambuco state, on June 24. He was there to report on the Awa, considered one of the world's most endangered tribes. Bonnie Jo Mount, The Washington Post. Prosecutors have filed murder charges against Pelado, who led investigators to the remains, his brother Osini da Costa de Oliveira, and Jefferson da Silva Lima, the fisherman who accompanied Pelado. 5 more inhabitants of the river community were accused by police of helping to hide the bodies. This was not an act committed by one solitary individual, police say. It was a community affair. Atalaia do Norte, Javari Valley, Brazil, Peru Bowl, Brasilia Pacific Ocean. Atalaia do Norte, Javari Valley, Brazil, Peru Bowl, Brasilia Pacific Ocean. Atalaia do Norte, Javari Valley, Brazil, Peru Bowl, Brasilia Pacific Ocean. The details haunted me then, just as they haunt me now. I knew both of the men who were killed. Bruno, 41, had been a senior official at FUNAI, Brazil's indigenous affairs agency. He had once overseen its operations in the remote Javari Valley region where he was killed. And Dom, 57, was a friend. I remember his warmth and kindness the first time I spoke to him in 2014, when he was a Brazil-based contract writer for The Washington Post and I'd just started as a reporter for the paper. He was one of the first people I contacted when I came here as the Post's new Rio de Janeiro bureau chief, and he immediately invited my wife, Emily, and me out to meet the other foreign journalists. I spoke with Dom just 2 weeks before his death. Read Dom Phillips. For months, I couldn't stop thinking about their killings, not only because I'd known the two men, and had frequently taken the same risks that led to Dom's death, but also because I couldn't make sense of what had happened. What had fed Pelado's hatred? What had driven a fisherman deep in the rainforest to kill 2 people out in the open, and believe he could get away with it? President Jair Bolsonaro, a longtime critic of indigenous protections, sought to blame the men for their own deaths. What happens when an adventure goes wrong in a completely wild region? The country's vice president pinned the attack on alcohol, saying the killers had probably been drinking. Story continues below advertisement. Story continues below advertisement. But a review of official records, interviews with dozens of people and a journey down the Itaquai show that such explanations serve only to obscure the government negligence that enabled the killings. In recent years, the government has reduced its presence in the region, leaving the Javari Valley Indigenous Territory and its 6,000 inhabitants more vulnerable to outsiders. And then, when an indigenous group moved to fill the void, enlisting Bruno to lead an indigenous patrol team, authorities neither responded to threats made against the surveillance scouts nor dismantled the poaching network they exposed. At its most basic interpretation, what led to the killings was the simple human motivations of hatred and greed. But the story of the deaths of Dom and Bruno also betrays the broader forces fueling the destruction of the Amazon. Those elements, nearsighted government policies, weakened law enforcement institutions, criminal impunity, also propelled this story forward, until the end came and the lives of three very different men converged. Out there along an isolated stretch of the Idaquai, where the river bends and no witnesses could be left living. A bend in the Idaquai River. The man known as Pelado was born Amarildo da Costa Oliveira and raised in a time of conflict along the northern crest of the vast Javari Valley, home to the world's largest concentration of isolated peoples. His community was at war with an isolated tribe just beyond the confluence of the Itui and Idaquai rivers. The river dwellers, lured by a government promise of jobs and wealth, had come to settle this distant part of the Amazon along the borders of Peru and Colombia, but much of it was already occupied. The isolated Corubo, a warrior people who carried long wooden clubs, were waging a failing resistance. To report this story, Terrence McCoy, the Washington Post's Rio de Janeiro bureau chief, interviewed 51 people with knowledge of the killings and region and traveled down the Amazon River to the remote location where Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira were shot to death. Defense attorney Aldo Rafael Mota de Oliveira declined to make the men charged in the killings available for comment. He said that Amarildo da Costa Oliveira and Jefferson da Silva Lima have confessed to the killings, but that Alcine da Costa de Oliveira denies the allegations. Neither FUNAI, the Brazilian Indigenous Affairs Agency, nor the National Security Forces responded to requests for comment. The years of Pelado's childhood were filled with reports of killings, attacks and counterattacks, men skinned and indigenous people massacred, constant violence that molded his community's perception of the world. "We are civilized, we are not Indians," said Alzanira do Nascimento Gomes, Pelado's aunt, who helped raise him. In 1989, when Pelado was 9, a relative named Sebastião Costa heard that 4 Corubo had been near his house. The community was terrified. Federal investigators wrote in a report on the incident. That night, Costa organized a group of 15 armed men to drive the Corubo off. They killed 3, the investigators reported.